Sharon, are you watching this? Are you able to see this in share screen? Excellent. In that case, we will stop sharing.
Mela, I have messaged you on WhatsApp. Please check the message, please. Thank you.
My God, even my California sister is awake. Mela, Saukema.
Who are these people?
This is, his name is Sam Lazaro. He's a NPR correspondent.
We are going to start now. So we begin with introduction. A warm welcome to our host, Fred, members of Without Filters and guests. Mela, our thanks go to you for introducing Fred and making this meeting happen today. To help settle into our meeting, I'll begin with a few housekeeping announcements. Set your microphone on mute when you are not speaking. Switch off video if stepping away from the meeting, and silence your other mobile devices to ensure that we are not hearing feedback or causing interruption during the meeting. There will be Q&A sessions at the end of each section of the presentation. Introducing Without Filters to our guests. Birthed in the times of physical distancing, in the times when we lost our familiar, our known ways of being, when we were nudged to relook to ways to satisfying our needs of gatherings, of fun, of living, the virtual space Without Filters helped with our needs together to connect, to show up. Gathering, says Priya Parker, is one of the most important ways in which we shape and build the ways we want to live in. How do we create it in our gatherings? Without Filters invites each of us to a new way of listening in by encouraging fresh understandings of the shared content, finding new aspects and perspectives we have not yet seen, fostering listening in a space with no bias or prejudice. The topics of conversation are chosen on the shared interests of members. Topics include, but are not limited to, the arts, wellness and well-being, marriage and relationships, family dynamics. Our host this afternoon, Fred Sam Lazaro, is a correspondent for the PBS NewsHour and board member of Sahan Journal, a nonprofit news service, and is the founder and executive director of the Undertold Stories Project. Hello, Fred. We will gain an insight into how Fred engages a mostly American audience on issues that don't seem relevant to their daily lives because these seem culturally and geographically distant. Fred will also be sharing recent stories which focus on solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems. By design and default, many of these narratives center around issues faced by women. Fred has received not one, but three honorary doctorates, numerous journalism awards, and fellowships from the Kaiser Family Foundation and the University of Michigan. He was a regular contributor and substitute anchor for PBS's Religion and Ethics News Weekly, has directed films from India and the Democratic Republic of Congo for the acclaimed documentary series Wide Angle, has reported from 70 countries with a focus on the uncountable issues that underlie poverty and human suffering, has served on boards of the College of St. Scholastica in Dallas, Minnesota, his alma mater, the Asian American Journalists Association, and the Children's Law Center of Minnesota. Fred, born in Bangalore, India, now lives in St. Paul. Dear members and guests, please join me in welcoming Fred. Over to you, Fred. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shirin. And good morning from a small town about 2 hours north of St. Paul, where we live in Minnesota. If I went that distance further on, I'd be in Canada. Just to give you an idea of where I'm speaking to you from, I'm speaking to you from my mother-in-law's house, where we are up for a funeral of somebody in the house. Not somebody in the house, somebody that the people here know, which is why I'm in this very patriotic setting. It's not where I usually hang out for my work, which I will get into very, very soon. I'm hoping to share a number of our reports, and given the makeup of this group, I thought of the 70 countries that we've reported from, I would focus more on South Asia because it's, of particular interest to this group. I think there's also a piece that I will share that concerns labor trafficking in Gulf countries. After each of them, it was suggested that we sort of break and start talking about it, field a conversation, and I'd love for this to be as conversational as possible. A special shout out to Mela for inviting me to be here, and when Mela tells me to do something, I just don't question. So, without much
I
further
don't know
ado,
what's happening.
are you not hearing?
Okay, I'll leave it. Hello, I can't get I don't know.
Is that a single participant speaking? Can everybody else hear me and see the screen that's been shared?
Yeah, I can hear you and see the screen.
Yeah,
All right.
same here.
All right, I hope the outlier becomes
If I may
not
ask
an
the
outlier.
participants to please mute your mics and have only Fred speaking. You can raise your hand if you wish to speak. Thank you.
All right. As Shirin mentioned, I run something called the Undertold Stories Project, and I'll explain a little bit as we in the introduction what this is about and how we frame our journalism, why we exist in the way we do. I am, in normal parlance that everybody would speak in, a shoe leather journalist. I go to countries, I do television documentaries, short documentaries, and bring them home to an American audience. This is a country that is historically, notoriously isolationist, if you will. People are not that interested in things that seem foreign to them. And so the slogan of our project is making the foreign less foreign. We do that by bringing stories to an audience that is in places like the one I'm sitting in, for whom the world out there seems very distant, and make it relevant somehow to their experience, to understand the humanity that we all share.
And it just became blank. Yeah, that's okay.
Our primary purpose is to not just educate the television audience that we talk to, but also to bring our stories into a single accessible portal for university students, because there is nothing more compelling than storytelling in conveying how an issue plays out in real life. So I would invite all of you, when you have a chance, to visit our website, which is undertoldstories.org, where we have at least 300 stories categorized in various ways from our work in recent years. All of our work goes on the PBS NewsHour, which is the most respected broadcast organization in the United States, respected for its fairness. It doesn't have the largest audience. In fact, its audience is smaller, much smaller than commercial counterparts, but it is an influential audience. And the purpose of our project is to bring this kind of programming to young people who would not normally tune in to television news broadcasts. The stories we do are not, on the face of it, uplifting. Water and sanitation. There is a lot to be said for this, but it's hard to tell it on television, for example. But the fact is, half this world's population does not
Ready,
enjoy
if I
the...
may? Ready, if I
Yes.
may? Ready, if I may? There is a request from Camille for you to please be a tad louder. Thank you.
Oh, sorry about that. Our story content areas are not exactly what you would find or drawing an audience, water and sanitation. But the fact of the matter is, this is an important issue. Half the world's population does not have the dignity of an enclosed toilet. And it is especially painful for women, many of whom do not go to the toilet when the sun is up. It's just something that non-women don't think about. But we try to get our students and our audience to think about these aspects. Female genital cutting, not again an issue that you can talk about on television, but it affects a lot of women around the world. There are a lot of myths surrounding it as well. What we try to do with storytelling is undo those myths. Labor trafficking, and I'll show a segment about this a little bit later. If we read reporting about human trafficking, it often concerns sex trafficking, which is absolutely legitimate, and I'll show a segment on that as well. But labor trafficking is the undertold story. We have millions and millions of women, especially from South Asia, but also from Southeast Asia, and especially from sub-Saharan Africa, who are trafficked into virtual slavery, especially in the Middle East. Menstrual hygiene. How do you tell this story on television? But the fact is that millions of girls do not attend school when they are on their period. And you can just imagine cumulatively what that does to the education of young women. How do you tell these stories? We use people who are strong characters. And many of these people, there's one Nobel laureate here that you might recognize in the upper right-hand corner of this screen, because he's from India, and we did his story, Kailash Satyarthi's, in about 2014, the year before he won. Many of these are prospects to become Nobel laureates, but mostly they're just very powerful thinkers who have moved the needle on some of these pressing issues. Am I being heard more clearly now, Sharon? Thank you. All right.
It was
When the
Camille
pandemic...
who had the challenge, not I. It's Camille. Camille, can you hear us now? Camille?
Oh, well. I'll carry on.
Okay.
We have tried to find undertold and underreported stories. When the pandemic first hit, it was a global event. And in many respects, people think that it was an equalizer. Everybody suffered. Well, everybody didn't suffer equally. And if you were a garment worker in Bangladesh, and there are 4 million of these young women who sew the clothes that we all wear, who were suddenly put out on the street, and many fashion houses just cut their contracts with the factories in Bangladesh. And the people who hurt most are these women. We were able to tell the story of people like this woman who were out demonstrating at the start of the pandemic. I live not far away from where George Floyd happened. And since then, have really looked into stories of race and social justice in the United States. This had historically been a project that looked at the distant foreign global majority South world in reporting, but there is so much in our own backyard, and it's been sobering. So that's sort of what we do. As I mentioned, our website has all kinds of stories based on or classified easily for professors to dive more deeply into these subject areas. Storytelling is very, very compelling. This is my granddaughter, Rosie, and I bring this up because it really brought home, there was an exchange I had with this child when she was 2 years old that brought home to me just how important it is for all of us, or how influential storytelling can be. So I'm talking to Rosie, and she's wearing wolf ears for some reason. I said, what sound does the dog make? Well, the dog says, woof, woof. What sound does the cat make? Cat says, meow. What sound does the wolf make? She said, little pig, let me come in. And that was Rosie's worldview based on the stories that she had read. That's fundamentally what we're doing with this project. I want to start with sharing a documentary that we did in Pakistan a couple of years ago. But before I launch into it, are there any blanks that I can fill in with anybody? I'll take that as a no.
Hi,
And
Fred.
this is a story. Yes.
Just a quick question listening to you. I'm Romila Kannati, and I just fascinated by the stories you cover. I've watched some on PBS. And since I have this opportunity to ask you, I want to know, did you get any pushback from the males in the community when you're covering such predominantly female themes and topics? And what was that as, how did you overcome it, or did you not face it? Just curious to know how you got male support when covering issues around female genital mutilation, the wash facilities, and all the major stories you're covering. Thank you.
It's a great question. The FGC issue is something that was a real eye-opener for me. And we did this story out of a little bit out of Somalia, but mostly out of Senegal, which are on opposite ends of the continent. And surprisingly, one of the things that we found in Senegal is that most of the imams and males had no interest in this issue. It was the mothers that led their daughters into this process, into this rite. It was a rite of passage. It is a rite of passage for these girls. But to a person, every imam that this organization contacted knew somebody or was close to somebody that suffered serious health consequences from this procedure. And what this organization Tostan was able to do very carefully is work with the leadership to make sure that they were okay. This is not a Quranic dictate. And the moment that was enabled, I mean, the men were at best indifferent about this, and in many cases very supportive of efforts, because it was never targeted as a female genital cutting issue. It was a public health and human rights issue and cast in that context. So it's all about the salesmanship. And I'm speaking as though this is me. It's actually the organization that we're reporting on. I just get to amplify the voices of people who are doing the real work. I'm a storyteller. Okay. Was there another part of your question, or did that get it?
No, that got it. Thank you. It's the framing of it, right? That's when you get that acceptance from everyone. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So, as you know, as you might know, Pakistan suffered from some of the worst flooding, and it is one of the most climate vulnerable countries on earth. And there's only so many stories that you can report to say more of the same. And yet at the same time, you go back, as we did 6 months after the floods had receded and CNN and company had moved somewhere else, and there was an area half the size of Great Britain that was still underwater. That was at its peak, but there was still substantial amounts of this parts of this country that was inundated. And there's, again, only so much you can say about flooding. It's still there. Is that the end of the story? So you look for ways, or we look for ways to bring the story forward. What's happening in this space? And look for strong characters. And I want to introduce you to a woman named Yasmin Lari, who might be familiar to some of you. She was Pakistan's first registered female architect, and one who rose to quite a bit of prominence. And I don't think I need to give you much more context, and I'll just roll the tape, as we say.
The village of Pano and 12 others, a brainchild of globally acclaimed architect Yasmin Lari, the first female to qualify as an architect in Pakistan.
Unless we find solutions.
82-year-old Lari has won several awards in a career that focused at first on designing modern buildings, like the Finance and Trade Center in Pakistan's commercial capital, Karachi.
We all know about the architects that, we're all trained to control everything. Nothing should be different from what we have decided, what we design. And here was a different way of working altogether. You have to lose your ego.
In retirement, she found her calling at the intersection of architecture and social justice, she says, beginning with the devastating 2005 earthquake in Kashmir, where she planned to spend 3 months doing relief work.
Well, it didn't quite work out that way, but I found there was plenty to do there.
Focus shifted with the urgent need for structures that can be built quickly and sustainably in a country slammed in recent years by extreme climate events, moving away from concrete and steel and using more local, low carbon and low cost materials.
When I was practicing architect, I built some huge monster buildings with a lot of concrete and steel. And I found that 40% of carbon emissions are because of the conventional construction.
Among her signature projects is this pedestrian-only street in the heart of Karachi, emphasizing green space and terracotta tile, which drain rainwater much faster than the usual concrete.
Concrete is the worst thing because everything becomes totally impervious.
For mass shelter projects, she found a game-changing substitute in lime, an abundant mineral that, mixed with traditional mud, becomes stable and water-resistant, she says.
I found it was an absolutely miracle material because it stabilized the earth completely and could last out for years if you submerged it in water, and we've tested that.
Lari's structures incorporate climate-smart design and materials with traditional ones. The key is to build on higher ground, add a short platform for additional protection from floodwaters, and use a sloped thatched roof.
It's made out of 8 prefab panels, and then it has a structure, a roof which is like an umbrella. So it's a huge amount of air movement. So it's very comfortable inside. My own dream is really that if I could just save people from displacement, if there could be just these structures which will make sure that people can stay in them.
About 5 million Pakistanis remain without permanent shelter. And the goal here is to not just build homes for people, but to train local residents to do it themselves. The hope is that this know-how can then be transferred village to village, creating not just sustainable homes, but also jobs.
And Lari says she's trying to make sure residents can make something to sell, which has allowed many to emerge from extreme poverty. The reason she credits for this success?
So I managed to get women mobilized to do things. And I found that I could get the results very quickly.
Much of that entrepreneurship is around cleaner cook stoves. Champa Kanji learned to build these stoves or chulas several years ago. Now she earns a living building them and training others in neighboring villages.
My husband joined me, and we'd go around to villages, and we'd make between 8 and 10 chulas in a day. We were earning a good wage. Now I hope that it will spread more widely.
The stoves range from the simple to very customized, like this demonstrator model in Pano village. For women like Dani, who uses one name, it's made preparing the family meal far less burdensome.
The new stoves are very nice. There's less smoke in your face, and it's much safer for the children.
Suddenly, women's postures changed. Because earlier they were crouching on the floor, on the ground, and suddenly every woman's back was erect. Suddenly she was proud, as if she was sitting on a throne. And women are in the lead in everything that I'm doing. But once they're strong and confident, I think they will make it. They bring about a change. And we've got to bring about a change. We can't go on like this.
So that was an excerpt of a piece that aired a couple of years ago. So I hope it gives you some sense of what we're trying to achieve here. Get, a solutions narrative to tell you about human suffering, plus an extraordinary character. There's all kinds of things that in a classroom you can pull out of a story like that to continue talking. The idea that cook stoves kill more people around the world than most diseases, for example, is sort of buried in this story, but it's easy to see, an aspect of it that illustrates just how that plays out, for example, and what happens when you give people the know-how and resources, which is transforming, what I like to call the aid industrial complex, in which, there is a huge global industry of people who are paid to provide aid that is to benefit people they call beneficiaries, but often benefit the givers more than the aided. Okay. Is there any question or comment that you'd like to fill in before I move on? All right. Hearing none, I shall indeed move on, or try to. What is happening? No, we've seen that one already. Bear with me.
But first, an unlikely
Okay. We'll go next to one of the most interesting stories, one of the toughest ones that I ever had to sell to the NewsHour, because they just didn't think that a story about menstrual hygiene would be suitable for an evening news audience that watches this program during the dinner hour. And I assured them that we could do this story, or we'd give it a try. And what I find most interesting about this, and this may not be a new story for some of you, so bear with me if you know this story, but I find aspects of it most interesting because it has as its lead a male protagonist, and a fellow who's suddenly become curious about the menstrual cycle. I'll say no more and hand off to Judy Woodruff, who's introducing this story.
But first, an unlikely innovation from an unusual innovator. Special correspondent Fred de Sam Lazaro has the story of one man who has made it his mission to bring affordable hygiene products to women in India. It's part of our series, Agents for Change.
Arunachalam Muruganantham says he was a born tinkerer, obsessed with figuring out how things worked, from toys to bicycles. He grew up in poverty after his father died young, dropped out of school, and became a welder, a lower middle class occupation in India.
To support my mother, I stopped my schooling.
But his natural curiosity apparently knew no bounds. Years later, it took him into a strictly taboo area in India's tradition-bound society, menstrual hygiene.
We are able to break the taboo and using it.
He's become known as India's pad man. Your goal is to have every woman in this country use sanitary pads if they need it.
Yeah, it's a movement.
A movement begun by a man who knew almost nothing about the female body until after he was married. You did not even know about menstruation at all. You had no idea what it was. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know when it is happening, how it is happening, even where it is happening. I don't know.
And he says his wife Shanti wasn't particularly interested in discussing it.
It's the greatest taboo. Wife never talked to husband, daughter never talked to mother.
That comes at a high cost in public health. Some experts say millions of girls across the developing world miss school during their periods and remain susceptible to infection throughout adulthood. Sanitary pads are widely advertised in India, but surveys suggest only about 1 in 10 women actually uses them. At first, Muruganathan suggested them to his wife.
I asked simply, there is some products in the market. Why you are not using them? She instantly told, I also know about that, but we have to cut our family milk budget.
Milk budget.
Yeah, then I find it is a matter of affordability.
He could afford 1 package of sanitary pads and gave it to Shanti as a gift, partly to find out how they were made and why they had to be so expensive.
The white substance inside uses cotton. The raw material cost of the cotton is few pennies, but I bought the product for dollars. Then even being illiterate, I thought, why not try to make an affordable pad for my wife?
Over the next few years, he tried using local cotton to replicate the commercial pads. His wife suffered through early prototypes that didn't work and went back to using a rag. Muruganathan then coaxed some female medical students to try his subsequent models, figuring the future doctors would be less shy. And he even began wearing a pad himself, creating an artificial uterus and rubber bladder, coaxing a local butcher to provide the raw material, and testing it out while he rode a bicycle.
I filled goat blood, animal blood in it. I tied on my hip. There is a tube connection to the napkin and the bladder.
Shanti had had enough.
Everyone in the village was saying he had gone off his head. Truly afraid. People said he had become like a vampire, that he was doing crazy things.
She asked me I want to go to my parents' home for a few days. She never come back. And 3rd month, I got a divorce notice from my wife.
She filed for divorce.
Yeah, I got a divorce.
His mother, who lived in the home, also left him, but his curiosity did not leave him. He called an American supplier posing as an industrialist in his hometown of Coimbatore, looking to branch out into feminine hygiene products.
Then I claimed myself, I am a mill owner in Coimbatore. Please send some sample.
The samples arrived, and one day when he wasn't home, his dog tore into them.
He took the courier cover, she scratches it. Oh my God, I saw a secret. The fiber. You can see the fiber.
So the dog opened this for you.
Opened it, the scratches with the angle.
It was cellulose, he discovered, that when scratched vigorously becomes sponge-like and highly absorbent. It took 2 years to perfect a machine to fluff up the cellulose, he said, a modified food blender in which the blades have to be angled just so.
It's got a prestigious award from Indian Institute of Technology as the best innovation.
It's simple, easily replicated, and can be modified to work without electricity, he says. The pads can be made and sold for a fraction of the commercial varieties. This is the model for how Muruganathan would like to see his product distributed. Thousands of small factories run by groups of women producing these sanitary pads at very low cost and selling them directly to women. Women are far more comfortable buying the pads from women directly rather than from a store, Muruganathan says. Feminine hygiene is not discussed in open company. Our own questions elicited nervous laughter from the very women making them, even as they praised their product.
There's definitely a benefit. Before we were using only cloth and it was very difficult. Now girls don't have that difficulty. It is much easier for them than it was for us.
Muruganathan is determined to change this.
I want to make this as a low-cost sanitary pad movement across the globe.
Helped by awards and his own advocacy, more than 4,000 small factories have started making his sanitary pads across India, each with its own local branding and language.
Malar is meaning of flower.
He gets no royalties from any of this. His workshop does sell the machines, enough to earn him a modest living. But nothing is patented. He wants others to copy or even improve the machine and methods.
The world is shortage of solution providers. Everybody, they want to be in the Forbes list. Under
Everybody wants to be in the Forbes list.
Forbes list. Nobody want to be a solution provider.
In the end, Shanti decided her husband was a solution provider. She returned after a 5-year separation. Somewhat sheepishly, she admits.
They had his interview on TV that he had discovered sanitary napkins. So I called him and then I came back. He was angry. I told him I did not want to get in his way. That's why I stepped aside. Now we are happy.
Happy for what her husband's work may mean for young girls like their 8-year-old daughter, Preeti Shri.
The strongest creature created by God in this world. Not the tiger, not the elephant, not the lion, the women.
If any man doubts this, he says, see how long you can endure a sanitary pad in your daily routine. For the PBS NewsHour, this is Fred DeSam Lazaro in Coimbatore, India.
Fred's reporting is a partnership with the Undertold Stories Project at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota.
So there you are. There was a story that is one of the most watched and liked in many ways. It wasn't our story necessarily, but there was a Bollywood movie made about Muruganathan, in which he comes home to a ticker tape parade and all kinds of things that they took license to do. But there are aspects of this story that I find particularly satisfying, and that is to get men involved and sensitized in some ways. And then there are all manner of issues since that story came on about sustainability, about environmental concerns when you scale up an enterprise such as pads that are discarded after use, because there are movements now afoot to create reusable products that are washable, for example. And the very business model has not soared as our story might have indicated it was going to do back in 2016 or 17 when that piece was produced. So we try, to bring these stories to an audience, to convey their sense of importance, their importance in global terms as global issues, and use tools like humor in this case and good small stories to tell about the bigger story and the context. Questions, comments? Time to unmute.
Hey, Sam, thank you very much for your coverage. It's quite wonderful to see how far afield you go and the topics you cover, and hopefully the small or large changes that are able to be made because of some of that coverage. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you. Can you identify yourself?
My name is Matthew. I am a very close friend of Mela's.
And you're in the United States?
I am, yes, in New York.
Okay, excellent.
Fred, his wife is Sylvia's daughter.
Oh, okay. Got it. Excellent. Anybody else?
Fred, hi. What in the forms of feedback have you received from the audience you have meant to sensitize with this kind of information? What has been their responses, etc.?
As best as we can measure, and one of the shortcomings of in my business is that we don't field a lot of feedback, or we didn't until much more recently. I will tell you that it's extremely positive. I can tell you any number of things, any number of stories anecdotally of how storytelling, how our stories impact people's behavior. We did a story that, if time permits, I might share with you, from Kalimpong in northern Bengal a few years ago. Our story prompted a college to send volunteers to this school in the mountains. That's one example. Had a parent, not a parent, but a teacher, become a foster parent of a child in Nepal, where we did a, for example. So that kind of immediate impact is what I thrive on as much as any feedback. But ordinary feedback from the audience is generally very, very positive. And it could be in part that this is, a lot of what we cover is not particularly controversial. It's the moment you touch on issues like politics, you start getting people coming out of the woodwork. But so many of our stories might, in the abstract, feel like they may be controversial, but in fact, when you watch a story play out of real people living and enduring, whatever the problem is, it just changes the whole narrative. It changes the way the issues are perceived, the way the story is received. Anybody else?
Hi, Fred. My name is Simi Katora. I'm coming to you from the Bay Area. Thank you so much, one, for the work that you do, and for Untold Stories. These were some really, really great studies and issues that we put a light on. I'm also a filmmaker, and I specialize more in narrative work, but I'm trying to get into documentary. And so my question for you is a bit more technical, but I wanted to ask about what the lawyering and protection process is like, especially when you have these stories covered by PBS. Is there a difference versus independent documentary work, or I guess anything that you could share on what that is and how to navigate that? Thank you.
Sure. I guess I come under the protection of PBS, such as that might be necessary. I mean, I can think of precious few instances where we've ever had a problem with issues of privacy, for example. Most of the people, historically, we just implied that you want to be on this program, which is why you're sitting without resistance in front of me and a camera or two. We always will seek the permission of an adult, a caring adult, or a caretaker if somebody is underage and appears in a story. Most schools that we go to have had clearances for us to shoot video of them. And we try and get clearances to be legal wherever we are. Sometimes in some countries that is not possible. You have to play cat and mouse with the authorities. Otherwise, you'll never get the story. And in many cases, they don't care. But there are some countries that are extremely wary of news coverage, and you have to dot every I. Is that answering your question, at least in part?
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
Feel free to contact me offline if you'd like. And somebody in this group has my contact information. Anybody else? All right.
Fred, it's me again, Romila. Just have a question around how do you get your ideas for the topics you cover? Does that come from PBS, a team, or be interested to know how you get your ideas? Thank you.
On rare occasion, PBS will call, the PBS NewsHour will call, but for the most part, I am finding these stories and pitching them to PBS based on an educated guess, because I've been with them for many years, on what the appetite is. I also do a scan of what others in the system have done so that I'm not replicating anything. But beyond that, I just read. The project is called the Undertold Stories Project. It's not the Untold Stories Project, and it's so they've been told by somebody, and I have read these stories in a variety of media. I try and read everything from the Wall Street Journal to the New York Times to the Guardian to the Times of India to the Wire in India, for example. There's a thriving media landscape that is rich with stories that we try to repurpose and bring forward. The menstrual hygiene story, for example, was featured in the New York Times Magazine before we did it. And nobody in broadcast thought they could do it simply because of the inherent, what we call the ick factor. And that's not my word, but there are certain no-go areas, and this is one of them. I'm rambling on.
Thank you. No, that answered it. Thanks.
All right. Shall we move on? Sharon, how long do we have, by the way? What's the drop dead out time on this? I don't want to overstay the welcome here. Are we at 90 minutes from start to finish? Mela? Nama?
Frederick, you have, 90 minutes, yes.
Got it. We've got room for one or two more. I want to talk a little bit about the undertold story of trafficking. And this one illustrates a lot the impact potentially that some of these stories can have. So without much further context setting, I think I can just roll on this.
But first, more than 3 million migrant workers every year, most of them women, leave their countries to work as domestic laborers, often in conditions some say border on slavery. Human trafficking is especially grave in the Persian Gulf and the Middle East. Special correspondent Fred Lazaro begins his report from the West African nation of Cameroon. It's part of his series, Agents for Change.
Yes, I bet you me now your honor. Me your honor.
They are able to laugh at it now in a workshop setting, but the skit these women are watching depicts experiences that are all too real. These women are all survivors from time spent in Persian Gulf and Middle East countries where they were domestic workers, victims of an industry the UN and rights groups say is rife with human trafficking and abuse. 3 years ago, Francisca Awa was working as a secretary in Cameroon and helping her mother sell vegetables. She had a new baby and with her fiancé wanted to build a nest egg. So Awa, who has a college degree, jumped at what she thought was a teaching job offer in Kuwait for 10 times her salary in Cameroon. She paid the sponsoring agency $500 plus airfare, but almost as soon as she landed in Kuwait, she knew something was wrong. An experience familiar to many in this audience and acted out in the skit.
You give me $6,000, you go back your country.
The bait and switch, an agent or trafficker demanding large sums if they weren't satisfied with their job or pay. In Francisca Awa's case, not teaching, but cleaning.
Started like telling me, you're going to work with me as a maid. You take care of my 2 children, the house chores.
Awa says she complained and asked for her passport back so she could return home. Although it's illegal, workers' passports are routinely confiscated by employers. The employer's wife refused, saying she had paid the agency $2,000 for her services.
And the lady was so angry that she pointed at the television and told me that, Francisca, do you know something? You are like that television. You are a commodity. I bought you. You need to pay back my money before you leave.
She had bought you.
Yes.
Then one day, Awa saw a news report about an organization, Freedom for All, headed by an American woman named Katie Ford.
And she said, please help me. There are many in much worse situations. Please help us all.
Indeed, Awa's story is far from unique. Each year, more than 3 million women worldwide are forced into servitude as domestic workers. Ford was shocked when she learned the extent of the problem.
Why aren't we calling this slavery? It's people being forced to work without pay, without an ability to escape.
Katie Ford is the former CEO of the renowned Ford Modeling Agency. Her parents started the business in 1946 and represented such high-profile models as Elle Macpherson and Naomi Campbell, bringing standards to an industry notorious for taking advantage of young women. Ford was the first agency to insist that models be paid a fair wage.
They made sure the client paid, and they made sure the models were protected. This is the first picture of her I saw.
Just as her parents did for their models, Katie Ford says she wanted to advocate for domestic workers. Her goal was to form partnerships with governments, employers, and human rights organizations. One of the first places she started was Kuwait, an oil-rich state of nearly 4 million people, where foreigners outnumbered native Kuwaitis by 2 to 1. It is the only country in the Persian Gulf region to even acknowledge there's a problem with domestic workers.
Kuwait became the first country in the Gulf region to pass a law that attempts to protect the rights of domestic workers, requiring at least 1 day off per week, for example, and setting the maximum number of hours worked per week. It's not much. That maximum is 72 hours, and the law doesn't specify that the worker be allowed out of the home on that day off. And many, in fact, are forced to remain in their employer's home on their day off.
The Kuwait government has established a shelter with a capacity for 500 where foreign domestic workers can escape abusive employers. We were given a rare tour of the facility by its director, Falah Al-Motairi.
The services that are provided include legal services, social, cultural, and emotional help if needed. When it comes to deciding what the next step is, it's up to the individual herself. Does she want to stay in the country? That's when we discuss options. 90% of the women want to go back to their home countries.
Since the shelter opened 2.5 years ago, nearly 8,000 women have passed through, waiting for passports to be returned, trying to find the means to buy return tickets, sorting out various legal problems. We spoke with 5 women from countries as diverse as Madagascar, Sierra Leone, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and the Philippines. All said they were either unpaid or severely underpaid. Many were lured here under false pretenses. 19-year-old Hassanatu Bangura says her parents thought they were sending her to college.
Ijab, I think that I'm going to start the school. So we go to the office. She said that I'm going to work.
We have a domestic labor law, but we don't have clear punishments or punishments that are enough to make an employer stop.
Bibi Al-Sabah is a member of Kuwait's ruling family. 12 years ago, she founded an organization designed to get workers legal help. Also, she says, to change the culture and attitudes toward domestic workers.
We're rich people and we can afford to have people working for us. And so with this idea, a lot of people eventually just lost track of how humans should behave. It became part of the culture now to have workers everywhere. And so people forget that they're humans and forget that these people are, have lives and have children and have, their dignity.
Falah Al-Motairi acknowledges that more reforms need to happen, but he's convinced that Kuwait has turned a corner. And he says to truly eradicate the problem, traffickers must be held accountable in the workers' countries.
Because of sovereignty issues, Kuwait cannot track down criminals in other countries. It can't do anything about people outside its jurisdiction.
Also, I learned about gratitude.
Francisca Awa isn't sure she can stop the traffickers either, but she is trying to help the desperate economic plight of women in low-income countries like Cameroon. After being rescued by Katie Ford 18 months ago, the 2 women have teamed up to form a career training program for women in this West African country.
I wish that the girls should be like empowered personally. They should learn to do something within their country. Get all the things you need to start their businesses with.
Last fall, Awal led a workshop with 34 young women who fled abusive work situations in the Middle East. They were learning how to finance and start their own businesses.
They are now 2 employees.
It included field trips to restaurants and markets to learn from other entrepreneurs and team building exercises.
You wake up, you clean everywhere, okay?
Gatherings like these have helped women overcome, even laugh at their traumatic experiences, and maybe, they say, spread the word to other would-be trafficking victims. For the PBS NewsHour, this is Fred DeSam Lazaro in Kumba, Cameroon.
Fred's reporting is a partnership with the Undertold Stories Project at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota.
Fred, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any language barriers when you go to all these places, Fred?
No, we usually work with translators. It's just part of doing business. You find people who'll do translating, not interpreting, because we have problems with that sometimes, because when you hire somebody locally, you'll probably find certain prejudices will kick in, and the person you've hired doesn't think the person who's speaking ought to be saying what they're saying, so they'll interpret it in a way that they think is more appropriate. And I remember being in Mali one time, and we spent a lot of time with cotton farmers in rural Mali, and there were I would hear long bursts of the local language and a translation from the guy that we'd hired, and there'd be 2 minutes of the person speaking and 20 seconds of the translation. And I would say, is that all they said? Yeah, that's all they said. And I started to doubt it after a while. And one of the things that almost all of these farmers shared in that part of the world was a surname, which is Koulibaly or Koulibaly. And so I came back to Minneapolis. We looked in the phone book or whatever, the electronic phone book, and found a Koulibaly in Minneapolis, went to a Starbucks and played the tape for him and got more translation that way. So we have to sometimes watch for it, but that's usually not a problem. I just want to say a couple of things about that piece that I think are worth noting. There is, and I've been trying to get a picture of this for the longest time, there's talk, there are reports, that is to say, of the Philippine embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, which has a huge tent camp of women who are escaping abusive employers, for example. The problem is just really pervasive. And unlike countries like the Philippines and India, which are large countries that have consular representation, in the case of Francesca, Cameroon did not even have a consular representation. They didn't have an embassy in Kuwait. So where do you flee? Especially when someone has confiscated your passport. It's a really despairing situation. She went to the Central African Republic embassy and sought refuge, and somehow, it managed to work itself out. So these are the truly vulnerable people in this horrific industry. The other thing that really comes back to me about this story is how important it is that you get people of influence to get involved with the story, and what causes that to happen. And Katie Ford, who is the heiress to the Ford fortune, whose parents, actually made modeling a profession. Until the 1940s, you practically paid, or you did certain favors to get into catalogs. I mean, that was the industry. And the Fords were the first to say, no, these need to be professionalized. And they took care of their models. And Katie saw in these trafficked women these models from a previous generation. And it was just really interesting to me. The other thing that's very interesting is to get somebody from the ruling family, for example, in this case, Bibi al-Sabah of the Kuwait ruling family, to get engaged, because that can get some action going. And as a consequence of that piece, Katie took it to the UAE, and the UAE has introduced a labor law, for what it's worth, that at least brings a certain amount of protection for these domestic workers, but they are really not in a good way. Any questions or comments beyond that?
There's a question from Bhavani who's asking, are there male and boy trafficking? Is there male and boy trafficking as well?
There is some. I'm not an authority on it. There is unquestionably some, but it's overwhelmingly female. But there are a lot of male laborers who go to the Middle East and also work in very daunting conditions. And I think the stories were pretty prominent during the World Cup that Qatar hosted a couple of years ago, of how many Nepali in particular laborers actually died of heat stroke and other conditions, building the complex that enabled this event to happen. Anyone else? Okay. I will move on to the next piece that I want to share with you. I need to determine what that is. Trafficking. We'll go to a different kind of trafficking, and this is sex trafficking in one of the world capitals of it, which is in the northern Bihar, northeastern Indian state of Bihar, and its border with Nepal, which is a major source country. India is a destination country for a lot of what happens. We did a two-part series out of this small community, which really illustrated to me how so much happens, so much criminality occurs outside of the major cities of so many countries. Like, you have more sophisticated systems of checks and balances in cities like Delhi or Bombay or Bangalore, and especially Calcutta. But when you get to the remotest parts, the policing quality is substandard, and there's a great deal of impunity. And all we did with this story is give a snapshot of how this unfolds in real life. I'm going to show you part 2 of a 2-part series that we did. And if you're interested, you can go to our website and watch the whole thing. That's the wrong one.
Now to the second part of Special Correspondent Fred DeSam Lazaro's report on the struggles to stop sex trafficking in India. Last night, we witnessed a failed attempt to rescue young women forced into prostitution, one in which police appeared to be covering up for the traffickers. In tonight's report, Fred follows another rescue attempt, one with a very different outcome. His story is part of our Agents for Change series.
In India's impoverished rural state of Bihar, people struggle to live off the land. One of the few businesses that thrives is underground.
This is one of the epicenters in the world for human trafficking. Little girls are trafficked into prostitution. They are put on buses and trucks and taken to the big brothels of Bombay, Delhi, and Calcutta, but sometimes closer by.
Ruchira Gupta and the human rights group she founded, Apne Aap, or On Our Own, is working to change the tradition of lower caste women being channeled into the sex trade. The group sued authorities to provide schooling for girls rescued from brothels, and it runs a shelter for the women and their daughters. But first, Apne Aap has to work with the police to free the women.
So here's the law. We've printed it out for you.
And that means explaining a new law the group helped get passed. It punishes traffickers and not those who were prostituted.
We have to arrest the trafficker.
Sometimes that task is not easy.
The police is part of our society. And if the entire society believes that a girl is of less value, a low caste girl is of even less value. So unless their mindset changes, they don't even try to impose the law because they think this is not a crime.
Just the previous night, we followed an Apne Aap team hoping to rescue a young woman from a brothel. The raid failed, possibly because the police tipped off the traffickers. Rachira, what's going on?
I think the girl has been spirited away. We were kept waiting at the police station for 2 hours by local police officers who must have informed the traffickers here that we were on the way to rescue them.
In this morning's raid, the exact location was kept secret from the police until the last moment. Still, rumors of a raid had spread and brothels cleared out. But Fatima Khatoon, an Apne Aap staffer who grew up and still lives in the red light district, is a key source of intelligence. She led the search to a home where she said a girl was hidden. Not long after indignant protests from the homeowners, a frightened young woman emerged.
There's no reason to cry. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid.
As the young woman was led to a waiting car, Fatima Khatoon led the team to a brothel where she'd been allegedly working, hoping to gather evidence against her trafficker. Apparently, the man shown here talking to police and also taunting Khatoon. A loud and physical altercation ensued before he was put into the police paddy wagon to cool down at Gupta's insistence.
He was following us to try to talk the police out of it. And then he started abusing Fatima to provoke her not to go there by calling her all kinds of names, from whore to all kinds of things. Provoking her so that she would hit him and then he could hit her back. He's trying to stop us from going to the brothel. Here's another room which is being used as the brothel, where that girl be rescued. This is the bed where the customers are brought and these girls are put forward for the customers. And they're locked up in rooms like this with iron bars on the window, as you can see. Here's a little condom lying here.
Please take a picture of this. Get that book up there. It probably has names of the customers.
Next, another shack-like brothel. Here they hope to rescue two teenage girls, one forced to prostitute herself, the other the daughter of this woman who owned the place. Gupta says it's not uncommon for women to be involved in the business of trafficking. Many were themselves trafficked when they were young.
Rachira, what's happening right now?
She says those girls are in school. So I'm saying, fine, take us to the school. We'll go and meet the girls. We'll meet the principal. We'll meet the girls. So she's refusing to go there.
What grounds?
Saying that I'll bring her at 4 o'clock to the office, which of course she won't. But she won't take us.
So where did things stand then?
No, no. Take her in. Let's go.
They're arresting her?
Please turn the camera off.
No. We were asked to get out of the way because we were causing interference with the process of arresting the alleged trafficker. It appears to be happening right behind me.
The threat of going to jail seemed to cause the woman to relent. She was let out of the police vehicle just as I began talking to Gupta. Suddenly, a new development.
Being interrupted right now.
Suddenly found who she said was in school. So let's go and see what's going on.
It was the 14-year-old daughter of the brothel owner. Until recently, she had been enrolled in school and even lived in the Apne Aap shelter. But she was pulled out after 7th grade, being prepared, Gupta said, to go into the sex trade, a common tradition here, passed from mother to daughter. Negotiations resumed with the chastened brothel keeper and her son, who, in another common practice, works as a pimp.
Do you want to be a pimp?
No, ma'am.
So why are you doing this? You're preparing a 14-year-old to prostitute herself. You have another girl in the back, Sampatia, that you've enslaved. Have you no shame? And what's the use of you crying? Sampatia cries every day when customers come and rape her.
Sampathia, the girl being prostituted, would not be produced on this day, but Gupta was able to negotiate a deal for the daughter, 1 more year in school.
Chunni has agreed that she can study till class 8. I hope the daughter will become stronger, more educated, and she will be able to negotiate with her mother. And we will together make her go on and stay on in school for another 2 years. It's year by year that we negotiate for a child. And even a year of not being raped, a year of not being beaten is great. It's better than a year of being raped and beaten.
For the young woman brought back to school and to live in the Apne-Aap shelter, it was hard to see much beyond her immediate fears and turmoil, torn and confused by family loyalty and tradition. Counseling for her is just one of the tasks that lay ahead for the Apne-Aap staff. They'll do the same for the girl rescued earlier this busy day. Her testimony will be key to building the case against her alleged trafficker. In its 12 years, the anti-trafficking group Apne-Aap has managed to successfully prosecute 66 traffickers. But more critically, Gupta says the first 4 alumni of its shelter now hold tickets out of generational prostitution and poverty. They've gone on to enroll in college. This is Fred Sam Lazaro in Bihar, India, for the PBS NewsHour.
Press Reporting is a partnership with the Undertold Stories Project at St. Mary's University of Minnesota.
And you're looking at one of the most eminent broadcast journalists. She died a few years ago, and this was just before that happened, Gwen Eiffel, who was a dear friend and the only person I knew whose face eventually got on a U.S. postage stamp. But I digress. That was a story that just gave you so many insights into how stuff unfolds, how much impunity there is. And it's just a snapshot. It's not a solution. It's necessarily on any scale, but it gives you an idea of solution providers trying to do something. A year of not being beaten and raped, you'll take it incrementally and work from there, because it really is an enormous problem. And most of these agencies that work in the anti-trafficking space have to work to shame law enforcement authorities into doing what they're supposed to do. Absent that, there would be almost none of it going on, and they're not making a whole big dent really, but that's at least some insight. I should stop and listen. For any feedback or questions, comments?
Bhavani has given this on the chat. Fred, I have worked in rural India, and I feel that you are doing by bringing these stories to an urban and international audience is much needed. Thank you. There is such a huge divide between the haves and have-nots, between the haves, the privileged and the underprivileged, and so much that is not right, and so much more awareness and action needed. Vanita has said it must be so difficult and depressing to see these horrific scenes and lives. Absolutely amazed that you continue to go back and bring these undertold stories. And Romila says heart-wrenching.
Yeah. Well, I don't, I'm always aware of my privilege of having a ticket out of these places, which most of the people I'm with do not have. So I don't do much of the heavy lifting. It's the people, working there that do. And of course, that says nothing about the people, who really are suffering. So thank you.
Mira has a question. Such
Please.
important stories. I'm curious. What were some of the stories that you pitched but were not picked up?
You know, I'm probably self-selecting in many cases, Mira, and so they're more likely to be approved. I would say as a broad generalization, it can sometimes be difficult to do too much from certain geographies. Like I've been told that I do too much from India, for example, and that's well documented because I do. And it's because I have more connections in India and in Pakistan in particular, but we try to be as judicious as we can to get to as many places as we can possibly do. The biggest problem is not from inside Mira, but from the world out there. I was in Gaza in 2019, for example, and even then it was like hell to get into the place and like hell to get out of the place, and not a lot of fun to live in the place. Our story was about water and the disparities between water access in Gaza versus in the rest of Israel, which is one of the most water efficient countries in the world, for example. It'd be impossible to go into Gaza today, and that's just one location. I've done a lot of work in Haiti. Impossible to get into Haiti today. Central African Republic, Afghanistan, Somalia. There are so many places that need telling because there are millions of people, Sudan, suffering enormously, and almost nobody hears about it because the major conflicts, you know, suck up all the oxygen in my business, for example. Anyone else?
Frederick, do you have to get permission from like some of these really remote places, permission from the government to do your story? Do they object sometimes and they prevent you?
Well, most of the time, you know, we're very careful and get permission. Sometimes that's not possible, and but we are working with key allies who can get us in and out quickly. I remember being in the Peshawar region of Pakistan, which is right on the Afghan border, in the northwestern province, and you work with competent people who say, you know, we have 45 minutes to get in and get out before you start to be felt, your presence starts to be felt. And in that particular instance, it was a story about flood recoveries. This is in 2011. This was when there was a lot of drone activity in that part of the world, at American instigation. And we were fortunate to be able to talk to villagers there who said, nobody wants to come in and help us because they're too afraid of the security situation. So that was one of the more valuable stories that we did. Most of the time we try to get permission. It wasn't even a permission thing. It was, in that case, you know, we had the right visas and everything. So that's one instance, Mela. The other one that pops to mind is in Ethiopia, which is, you know, which at the time had a really paranoid regime. It's not improved, even though it's changed now. And we were arrested in Ethiopia because they thought we were covering a story, which we weren't. And we had, fortunately, all the right documentation. Didn't help us for a day and a half, and then we were let go. But most of the time, we try and stay, you know, very careful, work with very competent local people who are expert in judging, you know, what you can and cannot do. And I don't do, you know, when I look at some of the reporting that has happened in war zones, what's happening, you know, even today in Gaza, I mean, I'm just humbled to watch what these journalists do and have done over the, you know, recent period of time.
Thank you.
Okay. I want to leave us with with something that's a little more uplifting in conclusion. And this is a story that is one of my all-time favorites. And if some of you have watched it in the past, I apologize. But at the same time, I think it's kind of nice to watch it again because I've watched it about 17,000 times, and I still love the story of Gandhi Ashram in Kalimpong. And so without much further ado, I'd like to show you a final segment.
Now,
sorry. Okay, there we go.
Finally tonight, hitting the right note. Special correspondent Fred DeSam Lazaro returns to a remote Himalayan community in India for a story of promise and success.
Good morning, everyone. Today we have a very special guest. She's not really a guest. She's one of our own, Kushmita.
Kushmita Biswakarma came home to her alma mater one recent morning, an unlikely journey from an unusual school that we first visited 14 years ago. It was early in 2004, just as the school's founder, Canadian Jesuit priest Ed McGuire, was choosing his next kindergarten class, screening proud 5-year-olds. Most of their anxious parents had never set foot in a school.
Cake. Oh, good.
Father McGuire was looking in particular for the last name Biswakarma, as in Kushmita Biswakarma, which is common among people on the lowest rung of the traditional social hierarchy.
We're trying to pick the poorest we can find, huh? If someone comes and tells me my name is Bishwakarma, then they've made 80% on our entrance test that we have here, you see.
Admission meant a meal ticket.
It's a rather well-balanced meal, plain, but very nutritious.
Good nutrition was essential for learning, Father McGuire said, but good learning to get children to love school would take something more. So every child, almost from day one, was given a violin. Most of the students had never heard the instrument before, but their progress was easy to measure as you went up to higher grades.
I would bet you that 95% of the children I have here have never owned a toy. All these children can do is sit around and play Mozart, lucky kids.
The luckiest perhaps was Kushmita Biswakarma, whom we visited with her parents, sharecropper farmers living in a tiny tin roof home.
We are happy, very happy.
We, of course, did not have a chance to study. Now they are able to get an education. They can have a better life than we did.
Kushmita was well on her way under the tutelage of a German volunteer teacher. An 8th grader here, she would soon make an unimaginable leap for someone of her background, high school in Germany. She lived with the family of her mentor, Margaret Klein. Aside from high school, she was also accepted into a prestigious conservatory in Munich, getting a formal music education. She also used her keen ear to pick up the language, excitedly telling a friend here on home video about how her exams went. But back home, just a few months later in 2005, there was terrible news. Father McGuire, the school's founder, died suddenly of a heart attack. He was 77.
He was a much loved person by children. People here in Kalampur, that was a big loss for everyone. And more so because it was untimely. No one expected Father McGuire to go so suddenly.
It must have been very tough on you.
Yeah, it was, really had to tell everyone that I'm Father McGuire.
Father Paul de Souza says the transition was painful and there was very little money, especially after the school's original building became unsafe following earthquakes in the region. Money from German Jesuit organizations built a new and expanding campus. Through it all, Father de Souza says, the school has tried to be faithful to Father McGuire's mission.
Music is used as a medium, which is central to all that happens in Gandhi ashram, to give them that joy, to give them the confidence, and help them focus in life on their studies.
You like the violin a lot?
Yes.
Father D'Souza says music can start these children dreaming, aspiring to futures their parents could never fathom.
I want to be an engineer, army, doctor, a teacher.
However, the poster alum for the school, fittingly, is now a professional musician. Sushmita Biswakarma went on to earn bachelor's and master's degrees in music performance from the University of Nuremberg. She's performed before audiences across Germany and Europe. Performing at Gandhi Ashram, her school, was something different, she says.
I'm so sorry.
The tears brought on by a flood of memories of a profoundly special childhood.
Takes me back to my days when I entered the school, very new, fresh. I got the violin for the first time in my hand. It reminds me of where I come from, and that keeps me grounded. I feel home.
Her German education is geared more to a career path in Europe and Western classical music. But that urge to feel grounded at home drove her to return permanently to India 2 years ago. She's worked to expand her repertoire, trying to establish herself in India's music capital, Mumbai, where the Bollywood film industry is also the main source of popular music.
I needed to find out myself, like where exactly at last I belong to, because it's quite difficult being in the middle of two cultures like India and Germany. You have to be you.
A year ago, she married Tilok KC, whom she met on a flight to Germany. A native of neighboring Nepal who also grew up poor, he got a scholarship to attend college. Now teaches economics at a private high school in Mumbai and edits videos of his wife's performances.
Still blows my mind, to be honest, actually, what she has done, yeah? Because very few people can claim to have started from the point where she did and have achieved this.
Kushmita's parents still live in the same home, happy, they say, for the future of their 3 daughters, particularly proud of their oldest.
We were very fortunate to get them into Gandhi Ashram.
Kushmita is both like an eldest daughter and eldest son. She's done everything and everything possible for the family.
I would want to build them house. I would want to, buy land for them because they don't have their own land. And we've been staying in other people's land. And my parents work for those people. And I don't want them to do that anymore.
Giving back is part of the culture here, Kushmita says, to family and to the school community, whose pupils are often the first in their family with a real chance to escape generational poverty. Music touches the soul, she told them, and showed them. PBS NewsHour, this is Fred DeSam Lazaro in Kalimpong, India.
What a wonderful story. Fred's reporting is a partnership with the Undertold Stories Project at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. And
Okay.
Wow, Frederick, that was so uplifting, wonderful.
No, I can add a footnote because I think it was about 3 or 4, 5 years now. I lose track as I age about how old some of these pieces are. Kushmita is living happily ever after in Mumbai. She has a little baby boy and has a reasonably prosperous music career. She's performed with some leading musicians in Bollywood, made a name for herself, and it's just astonishing where she came from. She did manage to buy her parents a house of their own as well. So it's a really happy story all around, and it just illustrates, what potential there is if you just go find it and nurture it. And Gandhi Ashram continues. It's not the same place in many ways. It can never be. You always have issues with succession in social enterprises. You have all manner of complications. You have a founder who's usually very charismatic, and when that founder passes from the scene, you always have issues. So in all of the social enterprises that I cover, and I've done scores of them, one of the major challenges is succession. How do you properly pass the baton to your successor, keep the values, have the founder not have a very long shadow to cast over it, let new leadership take place. There's a lot happening in this space. And there's probably a lot more not happening. So that's about as much as I have to share with you. I will say that something that keeps me grounded is one of the perks of this job is I get to talk to a lot of very eminent history makers, and one that has with me is Archbishop of South Africa, who I think about especially today as the African National Congress has lost its majority in South Africa's election. This was an interview I did with him in 2010 when he was decrying the descent of South Africa into so much chaos after it emerged with so much promise in 1994. He fought beside Mandela and suffered himself in the freedom movement to rid the country of apartheid. And it was a time, sort of mid-trajectory to where the ANC is today. And I remember asking him, I said, are you optimistic about the future of this country? And he came back with what you have on the screen. He said, I am not an optimist. I'm a prisoner of hope. And that has always stuck with me. Because that, in times of tribulation, and arguably that's where we are today, folks, it's something to think about. If you're so inclined, I'm going to stop here, leave you with our social before stopping the share.
Fred, I want to thank you again for this. I only wish we could do it once a month.
We'll get him back again, Matt.
Go to our website. Watch the PBS NewsHour. This is a lot of great content there as well.
Every night. I will now look forward with even more interest to your stories. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. Anyone else? We are flat out of time, I think.
We have to
say thanks to
now.
Mela for inviting all of us to join.
Thank you. There's a lot of people you recognize here, and of course, a lot of your family members, Devi, Kami, Meera, Keith, Kriti.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Fred. Appreciate taking your Saturday morning out to spend with us, making the foreign less foreign. It certainly did make the foreign less foreign. It wasn't a foreign topic, but certain things that we were not really aware of, which came through your documentary. We gained an insight. We did certainly gain an insight to the sharing of the documentaries on the outcomes and the successes of the projects and initiatives that we discussed. Mela, thank you for all the assistance in the coordination and gathering of this fantastic group of people. Thank you. Thank you to our members and guests who attended this evening. It was a very, as I said, a very fascinating presentation. Thank you, Fred. Thank you once again. And enjoy your Saturday. And I hope we see you once again in the same group with us, probably in a few weeks or a few months' time. Thank you very much and good evening from Bahrain. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Shirin.
Welcome. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you
you
all very much.
attending. That's wonderful. We have such a great audience.
Mela, HB.
Thanks, Mela.
Thank you, Mela.
That's
For all your
Devi.
effort.
Thanks, guys. It was so great to have everybody
you.
on.
Okay, then I'll be ending the recording now.
Okay.
And see
Bye,
you all.
everyone.
Bye.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
safety.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Sao.
Bye.